There are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. And one of the beautiful things about having a hard, scarce, finite, immutable form of money that you can't make any more of is it reflects the beauties of life itself. One of them being that you're mortal. We're all going to die. We're all going to be forgotten. This is all just a tiny little blip in the echoes of history. But even though we're all going to be forgotten, that doesn't mean that we won't be remembered for a significant period of time. Just because we'll be forgotten, it doesn't negate the fact that the amount of exposure we have of life experience being poured into us and life experience we're able to pour into others, it's significant. It's actually probably more significant than you might think. In many ways, we're more mortal than we might think, and we're also more significant in our impact onto others than we think. And so in today's video, I'm going to be explaining why your legacy probably is going to last about 300 years, or at least the total timeline of human experience that is either flowing into or out from you is going to be about 300 years, right? But then, of course, it'll be gone forever. So anyway, hopefully this video is going to be useful and interesting to you, because it definitely is something that's very interesting to me. Because, in large, I think a lot about the concept why we have less in common with the near future and the ancient past. If you mostly have heard me talk about this in terms of technology, in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of monetary systems, right? And that's all true, but in another sense, it's also true on an interpersonal level, and that's especially on my mind, because I spent some time this last weekend playing with my 5-year-old cousin, as playing trains, of course, because that is the priority of a 5-year-old who cares about Bitcoin or the economy or YouTube videos or anything else. They care about playing with their train sets or their toys, right? But I also spent some time talking to my 93-year-old grandmother about her life and looking at photos from the 1930s. This is my cousin and I playing trains because, of course, like I said, that is the important thing to do. That is the thing that you do to relate to with the kids, right? They don't care about, what Michael Saylor just did or Satoshi Nakamoto's history, right? They care about just the moment. Just spend the moment with the kid, right? But the thing is also true with your grandparents and with those that are older, right? They don't care about all that other stuff. They just want to spend time with you, right? And this is one of the beautiful things about having loved ones in your life, and hopefully not thinking about money when you shouldn't be thinking about money, right? There's a time and place for everything. There's a time and a place to be thinking about Bitcoin and money, which is, right now at the time of the YouTube videos or the Bitcoin podcast. And there's a time to not think about or talk about that at all. This being some examples, right? You got to play trains with the kids. You got to look at photos with the grandparents. And both of those things are really fun. And I enjoy them both. So this is a picture of my grandmother's family. This is her extended family. And during the Great Depression, 1935, probably 1934, don't really know. But that is her in the orange circle. But the point I want to make here today's video is to use that personal life experience for myself and hopefully make it applicable for you so that you can start thinking about how much exposure do you have to the ancient world that is about to go away entirely, and what is the responsibility you have when planning and stewarding for that future that you also can't imagine. I can't imagine what it was like for my grandmother growing up in the 1930s and 1940s, right? I also can't imagine what eventually my kids and my grandkids, what the world they are going to grow into is going to be. So the point here is that my grandmother remembers life before plumbing, before air conditioning, and she remembers the first time she saw an airplane in the sky, right? Obviously, plumbing and airplanes and all other stuff, have been invented. A lot of things have been invented, but they were not universally adopted, right? In the same way that Bitcoin's around technically today, right? It's not universally adopted yet, right? She was born in the Great Depression, and an orange, something that you get in a superstore for like 50 cents to $1, that was a special treat during the Great Depression. That was something really rare, really abnormal. And the world felt far away, right? The world was very, very large, right? You didn't have social media to be scrolling at 2 a.m. in the night, right? You didn't have 24/7 media broadcasts, and you were consuming like 22 hours of those 24 hours of consumption, right? The point is that in this time, you had great exposure to the past, right? My grandmother has stories of how her parents or her grandparents would talk about the old wagon days before cars, right? She has, all kinds of stories of, meeting World War I veterans and other kinds of people, right? She used to work in the army, right? Most people back in that period of time in the 1930s, 1940s were poor, sure in a relative sense, but also compared to today in more or less an absolute sense. And the status symbol of the day was not which smartphone do you have in your pocket or what's the new fancy gizmo you got. The status symbol of the day was, do you have a radio? And that radio, obviously, was more like a piece of furniture than anything else, right? It took up a lot of space in your floor. And the funny thing is that to this day, despite decades of technological advancement, from born in a period of the Great Depression, living through World War II, living through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the 2000s, through the 2010s, and the 2020s. Still to this day, my grandmother has not opened an email address, not started an email address, and she doesn't have a computer. But, and this is just the funny thing with technology, it has gotten more and more easy to use over time. And so even though she hasn't quote-unquote upgraded her technology in decades, she's still watching my YouTube videos with some with the voice command TV, right? So it's just a funny thing about technology is that no matter how fast it's changing, it's in some ways getting easier and easier for people to use. So hello, Mima, nice to see you. You should like and subscribe if you haven't already. But the point is that she has literally seen the rise and fall of radio as we know it, right? I mean, radio is not around anymore. It was barely around when she was young. It had its heyday, you know, in her early years, and now it's not around anymore, right? My generation literally cannot relate to the concept of having basically an armoire in the living room that spoke a voice to you, right? That sounds so boring, it sounds so expensive, and sounds so impractical, right? The whole idea of television, that has pretty much come and gone in her lifetime, right? And also, she has lived through the majority of the human-driven automobile era, right? Probably in a few decades, you know, I think it's going to be decades, not years, but eventually, most cars, most automobiles will not be driven by people, right? If you assume that there's going to be any rate of progress with technological advancement of autonomous vehicles, like eventually humans will not be driving the majority of cars, right? And obviously, when she was born in the 1930s, there were still cars around, right? They've been around for a couple decades, but the point is that if she's going to be alive, you know, for the vast majority of that period of time, the question is for you and me, my friend, what are the technologies right now that we think and feel are just going to be around forever, but may have their heyday, right? For me, I think that one of the things may be the smartphone, right? I remember, you know, the first smartphones, right? I remember the first iPhone, right? But eventually, someday, iPhones as we know them probably are not going to exist. They're going to develop into something new or weirder or scarier or better. I don't know. But the same concepts that we've seen for our previous generations, you should expect at minimum for yourself and your own life, and also even more so for the future generations to come. My grandmother now is retired, of course, and she watches nature documentaries on her giant flat screen TV, and you know, seeing all kinds of animals and scenery that her elders literally would have never ever been able to picture, right? Her elders and her peers had less in common with their future in the past, right? In their old age, they probably had the ability to see all kinds of pictures and videos of things that they had never ever been able to see, you know, many decades ago, right? And the same thing probably is going to be true for the people that are the young people of today, right? Speaking of which, by the time the 5-year-olds of the present moment develop enough to become teenagers and reflect on the past, actually, that ancient world will seem foreign, right? Imagine explaining to a kid today that eventually is a teenager, you know, let's say a decade or so from now. Imagine explaining to somebody in the 2030s what life was like for people in the 1930s, a mere 100 years ago, and then explaining to them that the amount of change that they see looking backwards is going to be reflected and probably magnified when you invert it looking forwards instead of the past, right? Quite literally, to the TikTok generation, to the kids of today that are spending literally more time on their iPads and their phones than spending with their parents at mealtime, you know, while eating out, right? To that generation, life a mere 100 years ago, a mere 1, 2, 3 generations ago, will feel equally as foreign and strange and barbaric and ancient as genuine ancient history, right? To many kids, in particular the kids that are spending a lot of time on screen time, you know, that ancient world may feel entirely foreign. They may not be able to relate to it at all, right? And a lot of us, myself included, often think about the concept of 6 degrees of separation, right? You've probably heard this before, right? 6 degrees away from Kevin Bacon or whatever, right? The same thing, I think, is true and actually magnified within the Bitcoin network, right? I would argue that you watching this, dear viewer, you are probably way less than 6 degrees of separation from literally every single person in Bitcoin. I have traveled to well over a dozen countries for Bitcoin conferences and meetups. I've gone to, I think, 20 or so US states now at this point for different kinds of conferences and meetups. Some of them have 30,000 people, most of them have a couple hundred people, and some of them only have 10 people. But it never ceases to amaze me that almost at every single Bitcoin event I go to, I meet somebody that is good friends with somebody else I know that I would never have expected them to meet, but they met at some other Bitcoin event or whatever, right? And the point is that most of us in Bitcoin today are probably not 6 degrees of separation away. You're probably like 1, 2, maybe 3 degrees of separation from literally every everybody in the network, including Max Kaiser, including Michael Saylor, including that other anonymous pleb watching this video, right? Probably people you know are watching this video right now. Just because this circle is super, super, super tiny, right? There aren't 8 billion people in Bitcoin. There aren't even 8 million people in Bitcoin, right? You're not 6 degrees away. You're way less than 6 degrees away, right? Including Satoshi Nakamoto himself, in my opinion, right? If you've ever met Adam Beck, if you've ever met other people from the Bitcoin Talk Forum era, right? I know multiple people already that come to mind. I can think of 3 or 4 people I can think of that were around back in those days, and at least digitally were communicating with Satoshi Nakamoto, right? And so the same thing is probably true with you, right? You probably are only 3, maybe 4, but I think 3 degrees of separation away from Satoshi Nakamoto himself, right? The world is a lot smaller than you think, okay? This is not an entirely new concept if you've ever, left your home and gone actually out into the world. But the point I want to make here is that I think this is also true when it comes to temporal 6 degrees of separation, right? You may be 3 degrees of separation from Michael Saylor, but you also are probably only 3 degrees of separation from the 1700s, right? And so as far away as other people in the world geographically today might feel, they're actually not nearly as far away as you think. And also, periods of time forwards and backwards are probably not nearly as far away as you think, right? This concept is true in terms of temporal distance and relationships, right? My grandmother had parents and grandparents. It's also true in terms of time. As an example, like I said earlier, my grandmother had parents and grandparents who had stories of the horse wagon days well before the automobile, right? Her parents, her family, she grew up hearing stories about before oil and before electricity, right? And, now I am hearing from her stories about before these things that I take for granted, right? And eventually my grandkids are going to be hearing stories from me about what life was like back in the ancient archaic days where we gave all of our political currency to a magic lawyer living in Washington, D.C. that would come out and decree the price of money every few weeks or whatever, right? Like, these kinds of things are just going to be more true for your kids and grandkids. So if you're watching this, and especially if you have kids or grandkids, and you hope that they have any kind of beneficial future where they, don't squander the wealth that they're going to inherit directly from you and also indirectly from the world's technological progress, it's really important you teach them these things. Is that quite literally the struggles, the distractions, the temptations, the opportunities that they have today have nothing in common with where they're going to be 30 years from now, right? Likewise, I think it is very safely possible, very realistic to say that the average 5-year-old of today is going to live much longer than the average person of today, right? If you assume, again, any rate of progress in our medicine and our longevity and health span extension technologies, right? If you assume any rate of progress, then you should assume at minimum the kids of today are going to live equally long lives than people today. And maybe the average person born right now is going to live, instead of 70 or 80 years, maybe they'll live 80 to 100 years, right? Some people speculate maybe over 100. Some people really speculate multiple hundreds or whatever, right? But the point is, one way or the other, our expectation should be that that line into the future is inherently going to be longer than the one in the past to us, right? My grandmother is able to pass on stories to me from the late 19th century, right? And likewise, the kids and eventually the grandkids of the present day of our lifespans, they're going to probably take our stories literally centuries into the future with only a couple degrees of separation. And again, you don't have to have exact predictions or exact numbers. The concept is what matters. That concept being that it is entirely possible for you and me right now, living in the 2020s, to be only 2 degrees of separation between, at the same time, somebody in the 1870s as well as somebody in the 2170s. People comment all the time, Luke, why do I have to, focus on a long-term focus? I'm going to be dead by the time that my Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, if you have anybody in your life, kids, grandkids, siblings, spouse, friends, kids, nephews, right? If you have anybody in your life that you have any expectation is going to be around in a couple hundred years, then this is something you got to think about. Maybe you don't have anybody in your life that is, biologically of kin, but surely there are organizations, there are churches, there are causes that you care about, and you care about helping them steward and prepare for this long-term future, right? And yes, with every with every additional degree of separation, the probability of your ethos and your priorities and your values being passed on go down, of course, so that somebody 10 generations away from you is not going to probably remember you nearly as much as someone from 2 generations might. However, even with only 1 or 2 generations, we could literally still be talking about potentially centuries, right? Potentially 3 centuries, including the past into the future, potentially 3 centuries of life experience that has been shared into you to help formulate who you are as a person. And then you have the blessing and the responsibility of passing that on to the people that are going to take that torch and carry it far, far into the future. And the important thing is that over the next 100 to 150 years, there was going to be more technological change than there has been in the last 100 years or so, right? Quite literally, when your grandkids or your kids or whomever those 2 degrees of separation are down from you, descending from you, whether that is biologically your kids or grandkids, or if that is descended from you in terms of principle, whatever organization you're supporting, the point is, when they look back to you and the messages you left them, it's going to be pretty similar to you or me looking back at time at this photo and saying, these were real people. One of these people in this photo is still alive, right? That's the kind of world that those people following us are going to be living into, right? By the time that the 5-year-olds of today are in their early 20s, like my age, early to mid 20s, they won't remember a world before Bitcoin or artificial intelligence. This is one of the reasons why it is crazy to me when I see parents or grandparents neglect Bitcoin, because sure, it may not be for you, right? You may never figure it out, but it's for your kids, right? Like, your kids are not going to know a world without AI. They're not going to know a world without Bitcoin. And so, yes, sure, the school work is important. Yes, sure, the school tests are important. Sure, the grades are important. All that's important. But I would argue it is equally as important, if not more important, that they're being taught and understood not on a school curriculum. It's already 30 years outdated, but they're being taught and educated on a world that is 20 or 30 years away from manifesting. Because even though that world is not here yet in its full form, it's happening so much faster than anything yet in history that by the time it is here, it will have changed the world tremendously, and most people will not be prepared for it, right? Most kids alive today are never going to know a world where they have a working career without Bitcoin or AI integrated to some degree. In the same way that for people in my, like, I remember the days, okay? Not to make myself sound old, I remember not having internet at home, right? The internet existed, it was out there, right? Just similar to my grandmother with plumbing and electricity, but she didn't have electricity, she didn't have plumbing when she was a young kid. And likewise, my family, we didn't have the internet for, the first, whatever, till I was maybe like 5 or 6, right? And I remember having that dial-up with the, or whatever, right? Like, I remember that, And now, even though I didn't have that in my infant and toddler years, and I kind of vaguely remember not having it, here I am, where I make YouTube videos for a living, and I live on the computer, on the internet, basically all day, every day, right? The same thing's going to be true with the kids today, right? And so maybe you're somebody watching, well, if you're probably watching this, you probably are into Bitcoin, but this is something to remind those in your life who maybe are ignoring Bitcoin, not giving any serious thought to artificial intelligence and the software that's going to eat and automate the world over the next few decades. But the point is, even if Bitcoin takes decades to take over the world, even if AI takes decades to take over the world, and I think that it is going to, both of those cases happen really quickly, but even assuming decades for both those technologies, the kids that are never going to know a world without it are already here. They're already living, they're already born, they're already learning, right? The lessons they're learning when they're playing with the little train sets, the cooperation, the soft skills that they're getting, those kinds of things are what they're going to take into the work field, into their life going forward, stewarding technologies I can't possibly imagine, right? Literally playing with a train set is you're playing with technology that is archaic, right? Trains largely do not exist anymore, or at least, in their modern, when compared to the old world, when compared to the ancient world, right? Or, 100 plus years ago, right? And so, not to be morbid, but my grandmother is the last of her era, right? And your grandparents, if you still have them, or your parents, or whomever in your life, you're thinking of somebody, surely, take this and apply it to yourself, whomever that is in your life, and maybe it's you, frankly, but she's the last of her era, right? She remembers this world with all these people, and she's seen all these people come and go, mostly go over the course of many, many decades, right? And she's the last one of all of her siblings, and she's the last one, right? And the only people in her life are folks like myself or her kids or her other grandkids that, are going to live into the future, right? And so my point here is that in the same way we see that for the generations older than us, eventually that will be us, because time relentlessly marches forward, right? Everyone else in that photograph I showed you is no longer with us. And likewise, I reflect on my own mortality. I reflect on myself and how I probably am going to be similar in that I have less in common with my near future than my ancient past. Probably when I am in my 70s, 80s, or 90s, Lord willing, future generations, the kids of that future day, will find it strange looking at me that I was born in the 20th century. I was born in the late 90s. That's going to sound so old to them, right? Literally, probably most people, of everyone that was ever born in the 20th century, I'll be probably the last 1%, if not last half of 1% of the people left of that whole century that ever lived in that century, right? I'm going to be the last tail end of that century, and frankly, of that millennia too, because we hit a new millennia in the year 2000, right? Also, and perhaps more importantly, I'll be the last person of that future age to remember a world without Bitcoin, right? Most Bitcoiners today are in their 40s to 70s, right? And so I am a bit younger than most Bitcoiners, and that's one of the reasons why I highly enjoy making friends with lots of Bitcoiners, is because I know these people, like you all, have passionately and consistently advocated for a world in the face of tremendous disagreement and tremendous criticism, and that kind of ethos and that kind of spirit is something that I want to embody and I want to pass on to eventually my kids and my future generations. That's why I like surrounding myself with these Bitcoin people. And again, not to be morbid, but the reality is that that's something I think about, is that eventually I'm going to be the last Bitcoiner of the future that was around back in those early days of the 2010s, 2020s, 2030s, and 2040s, right? That Luke, oh man, he's so old. He shook Michael Saylor's hand, right? He's so old. He went to dinner with Michael Saylor. He's so old that he got a selfie with that and back. Oh my gosh, can you believe that, or whatever, right? That's the point I'm making here. And if you're watching this and you're also young like myself, that's probably going to be the similar scenario to you, right? There will literally be billions, probably at that point, 10 billion Bitcoiners, whatever, 50 or 80 or 100 years from now or whatever, however long we live, Lord willing, right? But there will literally be billions of Bitcoiners. And there probably are only going to be a million or so people like you or me that were in their teens, 20s, and 30s back in the early days of Bitcoin, before Bitcoin was $5 million or back before the dollar died or whatever, right? Like, imagine being a 95-year-old here today in the mid 2020s, having met basically all the presidents, all the business owners, and all the historical figures of their heyday and their 1930s and 1940s period, right? That's basically the same kind of thing here, right? And that's how future generations, they're probably going to look to you. And so the point, and I'm saying this, is not to say that, oh, you should feel all special about yourself. Maybe you should, and congratulations on being here this early to Bitcoin. But really the reason I'm saying that is that future generations, in many respects, if they're going to look to anybody, and they may not look up to anybody, right? They may become morally depraved and, addicted to their AI bots plugged into their brains or whatever. I don't know. That's a little scary to think about. But if they're going to look up to anyone, if they're going to look up to any elders, they're going to probably look up to you, because you will be the elders that are probably the oldest and have the most recollection of a world that no longer exists, right? Even if, and again, I'm saying a lot of bold things here, but just stepping back for a moment, even if the US dollar survives another 75 years until basically 2100 or so, right? Even if that happens, and I don't necessarily think that will happen, but even if that happens, within a mere 2 degrees of separation, the US dollar will feel so archaic and so barbaric that you gave the global measure of productivity to a board of lawyers and human beings that exploited from the world's poorest and gave to the world's rich, and it caused all this kind of political infighting and turmoil, right? That's going to seem so insane, in the same way that I'm sitting here describing to you how, quite literally, for a young girl growing up in the Great Depression, a single orange was a special rare treat. As crazy as that might sound to you, that person is still alive today, probably that's going to be the same thing when the future people look at us talking about the Federal Reserve. They're going to never have heard of the Federal Reserve. They're never going to have heard of Jekyll Island. They may not even know who JP Morgan is at that point, right? They won't know any of those kinds of things that you happen to know, right? You and I, my dear Bitcoiner friends, will always be the black sheep, or should I say the orange sheep, in your respective families, because we're going to be those boomers, we're going to be those elderly folks many decades from now, always ranting to their kids and grandkids about, back in my day, we didn't have any of this, nice, fancy, futuristic AI tech. Everything was free to you. Everything is, everyone's retired and there's wealth everywhere and there's no more wars and this and that and fiat money and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, shut up, Grandpa, right? Like, nobody wants to hear about your, stupid days where you would cry yourself to sleep worrying about what the FOMC was going to do, or with interest rates the next day, right? It's like, okay, Grandpa, right? You're always going to be the black sheep, but that's kind of what you have to accept, right? The children of today are the first humans alive who will live and build on a Bitcoin standard. No human up until this point in history, until literally the children being born right now and the kids under 15, 20 years old, right? Those are the kids that are going to build in their working career on a fully Bitcoin standard in the world, right? And they quite literally will be the first people of potentially billions, if not tens of billions, if not in a long enough time horizon, eventually hundreds of billions of people that are going to be born on a Bitcoin standard, right? Likewise, it's the same conversation with this old photo here, right? My grandmother, was the youngest of all the people in this picture, obviously. And she is, the equivalent, I guess, to saying to her would be that she would be the person that would eventually live in a internet standard or live in an electric grid standard or whatever, right? It's the same kind of concept, right? That the kids of the present moment are going to live in a world that do not yet exist, right? And likewise, in the same way that the kids are the very beginning of a bottleneck of billions of people in the far future that aren't here yet, likewise, the elderly people of today are the very tail end of billions of people, billions of people in hundreds of generations before us, right? The elders of today are the very last of an era of people that are represented, right? For all of human history, there was no electricity. For all of human history, there was no internet. There was no air conditioning. There was no Bitcoin. There was no AI, right? Like those things didn't even exist as concepts in the public lexicon, right? And for thousands of years and billions of people, that never happened. And this photo right here, this is the transition from the, people that lived in the pre-electricity, pre-oil age to now the fully electric and oil age, right? And the same thing is true with your kids and grandkids with the Bitcoin standard. But there's an even smaller subset here, right? Sure, the children of today are the very beginnings of future billions of people, and the elders of today are the very final of an era of billions of people. But you and I are a subset. Because sure, there are maybe a couple billion people that are going to be alive and working over the next 3 decades as Bitcoin and AI slowly and then rapidly takes over the world. But very, very few of those people are actually aware of the transition that's going on. A lot of those people over the next 30 years are going to be really panicked, really confused, and not understand what's happening. And you, my friend, because you're subscribed to this YouTube channel, because you're not somebody that's just casually viewing these videos, but you've actually subscribed and liked and commented and shared this video with your grandkids or whatever you've done to promote the channel to the AI YouTube algorithms, right? Thank you for doing that, by the way. Wink, wink. Please do. But the point is, you're a very small subset, right? Of all the billions of people, they're going to live through this Bitcoin mass adoption over the next couple decades. And billions of people are going to remember what the world before Bitcoin was like and what the world after Bitcoin was like, right? You're one of the few people that is living through that in real time, aware of what is going on. Less than 0.01 billion people, aka, what would that be? 10 million people, right? Less than 1% of a billion people understand what's going on in the way I'm explaining it to you right now, right? Like easily less than 10 million people understand what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I would have, a lot more subscribers than I do at the present moment, right? As well as Michael Saylor and everybody else, talking about Bitcoin, right? And so you, my friend, are living during this event and also conscious of it. And so you are quite literally like a 1 in a million person. You are quite literally a 1 in a million wise elder that just happens to be like 50 years ahead of your time or whatever, right? The 5-year-olds of today have less in common with their future than their pasts because the final connections of the 19th and 20th centuries will be gone, right? As morbid as it is, right? Probably by the time that my, the young people of my life that are 10 years old, 5 years old, or 2 years old, by the time they become 10 or 15 or 20 or my age, right? They're not going to have any connection to anybody that was alive in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, maybe even 1950s, depending on what years or whatever we're talking about, right? Every single family has different connections and different exposures, right? And so likewise, in the same way the 5-year-olds have less in common with their near future and their past, right? The same thing's true with the 90-year-olds, right? Obviously, because our time eventually comes for all of us, as they end the year of life. And that's a really interesting conversation to have. And I have that conversation with a lot of my clients as they consider their own mortality too, as we all should. But in a world that only gets more and more technologically unfamiliar every year, those family and those friends, that's the last piece of normalcy they have, right? Quite literally, my grandmother's only piece of normalcy in her life, and I mean, she's happy and she's happy and she's wonderful and she's healthy for anyone that's curious asking. But it's just interesting to me to think about that, even though none of her kids existed, obviously, during her childhood, her kids and her grandkids, including myself, are the last thing that are kind of familiar to her, right? Because all this other technology is just too much, right? Online banking and emails and this and that and the other, it's just none of it's relatable, right? And my friend, you and I are probably going to be the same way. It's easy for us younger folks that aren't 95 or 90 years old to look and, think that, oh, we'll never be like them, but we're probably going to be like them even earlier than they were, right? Because the rate of technological change is even faster for you and me, right? Maybe my grandparents' generation, quote unquote, fell behind in their 70s. Maybe my parents are going to fall behind in their 60s. Maybe I'll fall behind in my late 40s or early 50s. I don't know, but the point is that you and I, probably the last thing in our life that is going to have any sense of normalcy, maybe Bitcoin, maybe the electric grid. I don't think the electric grid is going around anywhere. I don't think Bitcoin's going around anywhere. I don't think the English language is going around there. But besides those few things, and maybe the internet and some other things, like your family, the people in your life that mean a lot to you, those are going to be the last things in your life with any emotional connection that mean anything to you, right? And so everyone in between those ages of 5 to 95, like me and you, almost certainly, we also have less in common with our near future than our past. Because right now, you watching this is a precious little window. That box in white you see, this is a precious little window where at the same time, you're able to tap into the wisdom and experience to the first degree of people that have been born and lived longer, live more life than you have, and to the second degree of the generations before them. And also, a very precious time we're able to have an impact and build relationships with the people that are going to be alive literally centuries from now, from beyond your lifetime, right? Because, 1 degree, 2 degrees, it doesn't matter, right? The point is, it's a very short, brief period. And this has been true with all of human history, right? When the new generation overlaps the old generation for a brief period of time. However, it's in particular true today because of the speed of technological progress in general and the speed uniquely of Bitcoin adoption specifically. It's a very, very brief window. So I have 2 challenges for you watching this, right? And by the way, again, if you haven't subscribed, please do. I know I'm going to lose subscribers on this video because quite literally every single time I post a big clickbaity number go up video, I get a bunch of subscribers. Whenever I post a video like this, it's more reflective on the things that I think are really important, then I lose subscribers, right? However, the reason I make this kind of video and the reason I talk about these things is that I genuinely think this is going to be the new biggest problem for Bitcoiners in the future, right? Right now, the main problem Bitcoiners have is how do I get more Bitcoin? How do I stack more Bitcoin, right? Obviously, that's my job and that's what I do for a living. But at the same time, probably 20 years from now, most people watching this YouTube channel, their biggest problem is not going to be waiting for Bitcoin adoption to happen. Their biggest problem is going to be they have more money than they know what to do with, and they're reflecting on these kinds of principles, right? So that's why I think it's really important to talk about these things so you start thinking about them now. These are not the kinds of concepts that you just come to an aha moment over the course of a single day, right? These are the kinds of things that to have the most optimal impact in your life, you should be thinking about consistently over a long period of time. I know for me, that's done me very well. In fact, I would think that that's a large reason as to why I found Bitcoin in the first place. So ironically, it's also financially benefited me. But beyond the financial component, I think it's important for your well-being to reflect on these things too. So 2 challenges to you, if you're still watching, thank you. 1 to the young people and 1 to those that are more advanced and experienced in age. If you're watching this and you're young like myself, let's say you're 10, let's say you're 15, 25, even 35 or 40, dare I say, if you're someone that's younger and you're watching this video and you're in Bitcoin, I would highly encourage you, soak up every minute possible as you are witnessing history. If you ever get the chance to meet Adam Back, meet Adam Back. If you ever get the chance to meet Michael Saylor, meet Michael Saylor. If you meet whoever you want or can possibly in Bitcoin, even if it's some random anonymous pleb that you meet and some local Bitcoin meetup bar, whatever it is, meet with these people, right? These are revolutionaries. These are the pioneers of your day. And when people 50 years from now ask you, hey, what was it like back in those early days, 10 years before Bitcoin became mainstream? What was that like, right? You'll be able to say what it was like. Not for the sake of you sounding cool and stroking your ego to your future grandkids, right? But for the sake of being able to take those lessons you're going to learn, those experiences you have that you cannot ever replicate. Once they're gone, and pass them on to your kids, right? Many decades from now, you'll be one of the final few of a fiat era that no longer exists. Thank God, hopefully, Lord willing. The Bitcoiners, to the Bitcoiners in their teens and 20s, right now, you have the ability to be some of the only humans of the late 21st century, meaning that when you are in the late 21st century and you're significantly older than you are, you'll be one of the only people that was able to say, hey, I got to hang out with this person or that person or that person, or again, whomever you want. It doesn't matter. Do what you want. But the point is, enjoy your time for the sake of those pioneers, right? The thing Michael Saylor wants more than anything, including Bitcoin in my opinion, is for his legacy to continue on. This is why he was doing Saylor Academy before he found Bitcoin. This is why I think he went into Bitcoin as heavy and as hard as he did, right? A lot of the other people in Bitcoin right now that have been the revolutionaries since the very beginning, that care much more about building a better world than their own financial gain or profits, and those things aren't necessarily conflicting interests, right? But for those kinds of people, right, the best thing you could do to honor them and respect them is to carry the lessons and the legacies that they are trying to leave to the world into the future for them. Because just by chance that you were born in a year later than them, you're going to carry that on into the future. That is one of the highest, I think, one of the highest honors you can give those people. And also, it's one of the biggest burdens and responsibilities you can give to those future generations. They're going to be born decades from now due to no fault of their own. They just happen to be born later than you. And sure, they're going to inherit a world, a Bitcoin world, that's probably going to be way more prosperous and way less violent than the world today. But you're going to be able to give them that and hopefully help guide them to store these technologies that you and I cannot fathom yet, right? You're going to carry lessons with you from a bygone era that quite literally none of them will ever be able to experience. They'll be able to read about it. They'll be able to look at a picture about it. They'll be able to watch a documentary about it, but they won't be able to have a conversation with another human being about it because those people are going to be gone. My second challenge, and this is for, the older crowd, the more experienced part of my crowd, and this might even be the majority of the people watching this video. If you're somebody who is older and you're into Bitcoin, please, I beg you, I encourage you, teach your youth, teach your kids, teach your grandkids, teach people in your life, right? Teach your organizations that you care about. Teach them to prepare for a world, technologically and culturally, that does not yet exist. Focus less on hard skills and much more on soft skills. Your kids' report cards and score tests matter much less in their self-discipline and emotional maturity in the face of endless temptation and technological advancement at a faster and faster rate. And one of my greatest concerns is that eventually technology is changing us and our personalities and our habits and our brains faster than we can even comprehend it's changing it, right? We've had a tremendous amount of change, and now in the smartphone, internet, and digital age, where all of us have a supercomputer in our pocket, but eventually, I think it's going to be even stronger of a pool, even stronger of an allure, for better or for worse, right? These kids, within their lifetimes, the kids are alive today, within their lifetimes, they will be stewarding these technologies, weapons, and cultural challenges and opportunities that we cannot fathom, right? How do you explain during the Great Depression to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old girl that, hey, someday, by the way, there's going to be this thing called Facebook and you should invest in it, right? You literally can't prepare them for the future, right? How do you explain to this 3-year-old or 5-year-old girl in the Great Depression that, oh, hey, in a mere 20 years or so, or actually not even that, 15 years or so, or less actually, there's going to be this great Cold War where there's going to be all these nuclear weapons, right? You got less in common with the future past, kid, right? Buckle up. The world's going to be scary, right? Point is, the scariest things, the most exciting things, and the weirdest things are probably in front of us. And we're going to see a lot of them. We're going to see hints at even more of them, but most of them we're never going to experience, right? Even if we live long, prosperous, wealthy lives, we're just not going to see it. Our kids will, though, and that's going to be a really big challenge that they're going to have to go through. The leaders of tomorrow are alive today, right? So explain to these youths in your life, explain to them that the fog of the unknown, the gray fog in front of them, is inherently larger than it was for you. Yes, technologically, but technology influences everything, ranging from personal habits to culture to everything else, right? Technology influences everything in our lives, right? And so, yes, they're sailing into a fog that is much thicker than it ever was to you. Hopefully, it is bright, and hopefully it is optimistic. And if you're somebody that's a Bitcoiner, I think you understand why it is optimistic and why it is hopeful, right? But still, nonetheless, you should prepare them. Whether that means that you're preparing them for opportunities or you're preparing them to protect themselves in the face of dangers and fears we can't imagine, one way or the other, it can't help to warn them and emphasize to them that these things are coming. And so right now, I'm the weirdo in the family, and you probably are too, from being into Bitcoin and talking about a future where there's AI and this and that and the other, and jobs go away, and everything follows the marginal cost of production, and blah, 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 right? Everybody thinks that's weird, right? Nobody cares about stable coins, right? Nobody cares about Bitcoin going to $10 million, or, they don't care because they don't even think it's possible, right? They laugh at you or whatever, right? But likewise, my dear Bitcoin nerd black sheep friends, decades from now, you and I are probably going to remain the weirdos in the family gatherings for talking about what the world used to be like, right? You and I are going to be the ones talking about what the world was like before electricity, when literally everybody else has lived through electricity, right? Like, they will never understand what the world was like when you grew up because they only know what they have grown up, right? And so we are sharing this YouTube video together, right? you're listening to me drone and rant on and on and on, and I appreciate it. And thank you for subscribing. If you haven't already, please do. But the point is that you and I are in this weird spot. We're in a tiny corner of the internet. This video is going to be forgotten. I'm going to be forgotten. You're going to be forgotten. But the thing that will be forgotten last, of all these things that's going to be forgotten, the thing that will be forgotten last on this earth are the lessons that you gain from this video, the lesson you gain from the people and the elders in your life, and the way that you inspire and teach and advocate for those lessons and those legacies to the future generations. That will be the last thing of anything that your future kids remember, right? That's one of the reasons why I make these videos. You know, eventually, maybe someday my kids or my grandkids are going to watch some of these videos, right? Like, eventually there'll be family members of mine that will have seen my YouTube channel probably that will never meet me, you know? Hello, kids. Hello, great-grandkids. This is your great-great-grandfather, the weird Bitcoiner with a Bitcoin shirt, talking in his room into the small black box right here, ranting about the future that you're living that I can't possibly imagine, you know? Don't mess this up. But the point is that the technology is never what mattered. And I think it's really important to emphasize here, is that is the least important thing here. I talk about technology a lot. I talk about money a lot, right? It's what gets the subscribers when I talk about tech and number go up technology. But the thing that matters is the people. It always was the people. The next 30 years are going to be really chaotic as we cross this chasm from the pre-AI and Bitcoin age into the post-AI and Bitcoin age, right? In the same way that the early 20th century and the late 19th century were really traumatic periods of time. We went from the pre-electric and oil age into the post-electric and oil age. The same thing is true today with Bitcoin and AI. And the next 30 years are going to be really important, that we love and that we serve and that we care about the people of the present moment that are really confused and stressed and anxious about the present moment. But it's also important that we help the future generation understand and steward in this post-Bitcoin world. Hey, here are the keys to things. I don't know what they're going to unlock, but I know they're going to be powerful. I know they're going to be strong. I know they're going to be relentless. And I know that you're going to be the one in charge of them. And I won't be here to help you. I'm going to die someday, right? And so take these keys and steward them well. Take the lessons of the previous generations, you know, and they may feel far away. They're going to feel only more far away as technology accelerates you into a world faster and faster away from the world that me and the previous two generations lived. But you're 3 degrees of separation away from where you are into a world you can't imagine before, right? And so, like it or not, you and I are here sharing this moment in this tiny corner of the internet. We're the leaders of this era for our peers and for our descendants, directly and indirectly. And so while all of us and all of our generations are eventually going to be forgotten, I'll be forgotten, you'll be forgotten, right? While all that's true, and eventually, you know, in the end, the only thing that will be remembered are not temporal things of this world, but eternal things, you know, and to me, the book of life, you know, to me, that Jesus Christ is the eternal, right? Not me, not even my Bitcoin, right? Even though my Bitcoin will way outlive me, right? Potentially by millennia, but, you know, potentially even longer than that, right? The point is that in the end, we are all dust. We're all going to die. We're all going to go away. And even though we're all going to go away, even though we're all going to be forgotten, our impact probably still lasts longer in the future than we expect. You know, if you take nothing else away from this video, just think about that. You probably think that the last impact you're going to have on this world, on this earth, on this culture is going to be on your dying day in your deathbed. But that's not necessarily true. Even if you don't have kids, that's not necessarily true, right? Very easily, even if by the 3rd degree of separation, your morals and your principles and your Bitcoin are all spent and gone and squandered, for those first 2 degrees of separation, that could potentially take you deep into the 22nd, maybe even the 23rd century, where there's going to be a world that we can't even imagine. Consider these things as you reflect on how to better love and serve those around you, right? And remember that our little community is a very, very special group. So enjoy every day possible. Subscribe if you have not already. And celebrate those in your life that are still around and still with you, and always be building better and better for the future for the kids. Thank you.